Hello, everyone. This is Keith Lubner. With me today is Jay McBain. I consider Jay a good friend and one of the most knowledgeable people in the channel world. Uh, but before we get started, I'd like for Jay, in his own words, to tell us about his background and what he's doing now. There's some pretty exciting things. Jay, why don't you kick it off?
Well, thanks, Keith, and I appreciate the invitation, and I'm happy to be here. In terms of my own past, I've spent pretty close to 24 years in the channel. It's the only industry I've ever known. I joined IBM right out of college as an intern and worked in a number of different roles. And like others at IBM, which stands for I've been moved,
Absolutely.
I think living in a half a dozen cities with IBM in Canada, and ended up in Toronto with some different national responsibilities and business unit responsibilities within the channel.
Hmm.
When 2005, if you know the book "Who Moved My Cheese," people will remember Lenovo purchasing the PC company as part of IBM. So ThinkPads became Lenovo ThinkPads. And I was enthusiastic, and I was one of the first to put up my hand and said, "Let's do it." And so I moved over to Lenovo in 2005 and worked almost the next 5 years with Lenovo. Part of that was moving down to Raleigh, North Carolina, into the U.S. and taking on America's responsibilities for the channel, which was much broader. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on.
Hmm.
And in about 2010, I decided I got the entrepreneurial bug, and I joined some channel all stars in Albany, New York. One of those was Bob Godgart, famous for founding Autotask
Yep.
and some other really cool companies. And we started a company called Channelize, which moved from being a social network from the channel, from a mobile app platform for the channel, and today is doing artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and some really cool future-looking stuff for channel managers. So I stepped away from that late last year after about 5 years, and doing some consulting now, and traveling the globe with customers in Australia and Ireland and different places.
I've noticed that. In fact, for our listeners today, Jay and I are connected on several social media platforms, and I chuckle often because I see that Jay's been all over the world, seeing all different sorts of cultures around the world. It's kind of interesting. Jay, you mentioned your background, and it's fantastic. I consider you one of the channel influencers out there, but you did recently, within the last couple years, you created a list of channel influencers. Can you tell us about that, and how did you formulate the list?
I did, and the one I published a few months ago was version 2 of the list. I originally created the list in 2009, and the story behind it was really the move to the United States that I mentioned before. My roles previous to that were all Canadian focused, and if anyone needs to know somebody in Canada, anywhere in any city that is a key influencer, I can tell you. But
Okay.
up until that point, my world, which to me was a big world of Canada, just got multiplied by 10. Moving into the U.S., everything is just 10 times bigger and 10 times more complex. Um, and I didn't have 20 years of luxury to spend getting introduced and meeting people and figuring out this industry. So I decided to do a little bit of an experiment. And I was fresh off of reading The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you've read that, Keith.
Multiple times. Great
Okay.
book. Yep.
So there's a famous chapter, and not to go into what the tipping point is, but there's a famous chapter, I think it's like chapter 2, where he talks about Paul Revere and this idea of, you don't have to know everybody, but you just need to know somebody who knows everybody. And he called it connectors, super connectors, influencers, and he boiled it down to the law of a few. And basically, the law of a few said that, we all think that maybe Washington is run by some, very powerful interests in the back rooms. And we're right. There are, very powerful people. And it's very hard to predict who those people are. Some of them are obvious, but some of them are not so obvious. So I set off with Google And I looked at the entire United States channel and even the global channel from that perspective. And the first thing I figured out, it's highly decentralized. When you look at, there's 162,000 channel partners in North America, and they don't all read the same magazine. They don't go to the same trade show. They don't listen to the same influencers. So the first thing I learned is, it's very decentralized. And I counted over 30 communities where these 162,000 companies get educated, get certified, become smart, leverage peer networks, and really grow themselves and grow their businesses. So as I looked in the 30 different communities, it was a mix of 16 magazines. There's 150 channel-based trade shows. There is thousands and thousands of vendors. There's dozens of distributors. There's analysts. There's associations. There's bloggers and thought leaders. It was this web of people that all influence the industry. And while there's people that really focus in on one or two of these communities, they're really smart, really important people. I felt to be a super connector, I look for the people that went across multiple communities. So if
Hmm.
there's 30 of them, I just set off with Google at night and sitting and watching hockey on TV, on my lap. I had my laptop and I just started searching and looking at these 30 communities, but more specifically, who sits on the board, who influences the community, sits on their councils and communities, who is the keynote at their events, who is on the front page of their magazine, who are the guest writers and bloggers, who's on their list of the top 20 of this or the top 50 of that. So I took all the information I could find, and I thought that super connectors would want to be very visible, and I was right. So it started as just a simple spreadsheet, just started writing people's names down, didn't know one from the next. And I got to about 1,000 names across the 30 communities. And then the trick of the spreadsheet is I just added a check mark every time I came across somebody a second or third, fourth, fifth time. I added check marks each time. So at the end of the 1,000, it was a very simple sort based on check marks. And something jumped out at me in terms of the law of a few. This entire industry seemed to oscillate around 100 people. And I had a list in front of me of, in stack ranked order, literally the most visible connected people across the entire ecosystem or spectrum of
Hmm.
the channel. And I never published the list. I talked about it, but I never published it for a number of different reasons. I didn't want my competitors to get hold of it.
Obviously, sure. Yeah. Hmm.
But I really, from that point on, my first 6 months in Raleigh was, I think I went to 50 trade shows. And the idea was, how can I meet these people on this list? And, I would go, and by the way, number one, and he knows this, number one on the list in 2009 was a guy by the name of Larry Walsh. And he was a longtime editor of the biggest magazine in the channel and, kind of the godfather of the channel. And he talked to me one night, and I don't know if he remembers this, for about 4 hours, and basically gave me 35 years of channel history in 4 hours. So one of the tricks is I don't drink. So I would run upstairs to my hotel room and write down everything he told me, including all the names. I would just focus on memory. And, I would give more check marks if Larry mentioned somebody. And then I went to, number two on the list. I went to number three. So I tried to find shows where I could bump into these people. And obviously they're super connectors. So they're at a lot of shows. They do a lot of travel themselves. So I got to the point in 6 months of talking to 30 people on the top 100 list. And the amount of information, it's kind of like, breadcrumbs. You start just asking questions and they give you just so much more and more and more. And I was getting a channel MBA in 6 months.
Right. Right.
And the interesting side note to it is after I talked to the 30, the other 70 came to me. They're trying to figure out who this, spiky haired kid from Canada is with a funny accent, talking to all these critical people like deep into the night at hotel lobby bars.
So interesting you say that, Jay. So, what advice or conclusions would you give to people that, I mean, obviously people were coming to you at that point, so there was something there. So, what advice do you give people that are starting maybe earlier in their career or want to build their network out uh, in a way where they become maybe a super connector at one point? Can they do that, or is it like Malcolm Gladwell, where Paul Revere was riding in one direction, but everybody knows through the book there was somebody else riding in another direction. But Paul was more influential than the other person.
Right. So, the advice I would give is you can't change your stripes. And I, by the way, am not a super connector. Even though if I put myself on the list, I would rank very, very high. But I'm not a super connector by Malcolm Gladwell's description.
Okay.
And to easily understand who a super connector is, and you might be one of these people, but you know these people. They're on your street where you live, and if you need a plumber, if you need a mechanic, if you need a tree taken down, I mean, whatever you need, there's always that person that knows everybody.
Right.
Hey, I'll
Right.
get you connected. Here, hold on, I'll text him. Oh, I'll get you.
I got a guy.
I got a guy. Those are the super connectors. Back in high school, these are the people that knew where all the parties were and the gossip and stuff. So you didn't need to know all that stuff. You just needed to know the people that did. So, I was a maven, as per Malcolm Gladwell, because I was a bit behind the scenes studying all this stuff. And my natural reflection is not, or my natural intention is not to say, hey, I know this person, I know this person, I know this person, let me get you connect. I mean, that's not what drives me. I like the other side of it, which is kind of the intellectual pursuit of how this works and how a law of a few and how these people are so powerful. And the other thing is when I created the list, there's no rhyme or reason to the list. In 2009, 10 of the 100 people on the list were unemployed. So
Really? That's
their
interesting.
skills in super connecting didn't translate to gainful employment at the time. I mean, obviously they still
Right,
have
right.
jobs, but these aren't the CEOs and the vice presidents and these high flying people. In many cases, they're just everyday people doing, everyday things in the channel that just happen to be highly, highly skilled at understanding how the ecosystem works. So my advice is that you don't have to change your stripes. You need to understand your target. So
Mhm.
I did the same thing at the law of a few. I just tested it in Raleigh as well, the town. And I said, the mayor's going to be on the list, the police chief and the fire chief. But I started to look at it like who's really on this list of a few. So, get every magazine, go look at the charity galas, go look at the boards, go look at the chamber of commerce, go look at all the sources about Raleigh. You get about 1,000 names. You do it by check marks. Literally, there's 100 people in Raleigh. People that, there's a barber, there's a locksmith, there's the mayor, there's, these are the people that really make the city go around because it's, highly complex. There's not one umbrella organization in a city. Like not everyone's a member of the chamber. But when you look at who are the people that influence the most places, those are the super connectors. And if you were to move to a town like that and want to build a successful business, you start going to these events and seeking out these conversations. And now the people who know people.
Yeah, great, Jay. That's great advice for anybody. I mean, great advice for people that have been in the channel for as long as you and I have, but also great advice for people just starting out. Especially with social media these days. It's much easier to do what you're referring to,
Yeah.
mapping out with social media nowadays than it is years ago with when we didn't have these tools.
Right. And if you want to, you don't have to do the work now because on my blog, jmcbain.com, I published the list a few months ago of the 2016 version of it. And I talked about the algorithm because every time you show up is not the same value.
Sure.
Uh, if you're on the board of an important association, that's worth more points than being a speaker in a breakout session at a smaller community roadshow. So I gave factor ratings on all these types of ways that you could show up. And then it becomes an algorithmic score. And so I actually show the score that each person received as well. And number
Beautiful.
one on the list in 2016 is a guy by the name of Rob Ray, who is, basically omnipresent across all communities. And if you were to ask the 162,000 channel partners, I got to believe over 100,000 of them, could name him by name.
Sure, sure. And we both see him at all the different shows. He's always there. So I would absolutely agree with what your findings are, just anecdotally. That's really interesting. Can you give everybody that website again? I think people will be fascinated to go there and take a look at your blogs, especially this study. What was that?
Yeah, it's Jay McBain, JaymcBain.com.